I took a short nap early in the morning, possibly due to tiredness from the previous day. I needed to compensate for the 2 hours of sleep I lost. During my nap, I had an interesting dream. It was about the arcade where I used to spend time when I was 11 and 12 years old. This arcade was situated on East Street, and I used to walk there almost every afternoon after school to enjoy playing video games with my friends. One of my close friends, Wilfred, used to hang out with me a lot. We would even go to the library and spend time there until late in the afternoon. Both of us shared an interest in comic books. I used to borrow Asterix and Obelix comics, as well as Tintin books, usually taking around 6 to 7 books at a time when I was around the ages of 11 and 12. There's an interesting backstory to my brief obsession with comic books. I remember coming home one afternoon and watching a Jackie Chan cartoon that discussed comic books, sparking my interest. I wanted to pursue a career as both a scientist and a comic book artist. During that time, I aspired to become a zoologist due to my love for animals, inspired in part by the crocodile hunter, who I considered a hero. Growing up without a father, my perceptions of masculinity were heavily influenced by media figures, with the crocodile hunter representing the epitome of masculinity. The male figures I encountered in real life were mainly my teachers. For instance, Mr. Ebenezer was my math teacher, and interestingly, most of my primary school teachers were women. I also remember Mr. J.M. Naidu, who was exceptionally cool and even joined us during breaks and played football with us in the afternoon. He had an impressive kick and was the only athletic male figure I remember from those days. He would even bend the rules for our entertainment, giving us demonstrations of car donuts in the school parking lot, which was a thrilling experience. Another male figure was Mr. Sobrian, my 7th grade math teacher. He was a tall, alpha male figure who left a lasting impression on me. In retrospect, he was a remarkable teacher with his teaching methods and merit system that inspired students to engage with the material. He also had a math project that incorporated elements of art, making him a truly gifted teacher. I wish I could personally thank him for the impact he had on my education. Returning to the topic of comic books, after watching the Jackie Chan episode, I started writing my own comics. My artistic skills were not great at the time, so my mother helped me get library books from the Mimsunduzi Library in town. I borrowed books like How to Draw Cartoons and followed along with the tutorials and exercises. My friend Wilfred and some other school friends joined me when they noticed my interest. One of my friends, Colin, was an exceptionally talented artist, drawing nearly every day. My art skills improved significantly during the last 2 years of primary school, but I never came close to matching Colin's level. He was a professional artist. While I both wrote and illustrated comics, I also read them. Wilfred and I even had a small competition to see who could read the most Asterix and Obelix comics and The Adventures of Tintin. He won, and I admit that I was sometimes lazy and underachieving. I knew I had the potential to achieve more, but I held back because I was afraid of being considered a freak of nature and isolating myself from my friends. These emotional tendencies still exist to some extent to this day, leading to procrastination and avoidance. My typical afternoon routine involved heading to East Street to play video games. I would take the path from Mountain Rise Primary, past Forest Hill Primary School, and M.L. Sultan Secondary School. There were several shops with arcade games, and some of the most popular games included Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Street Fighter, Snow Bros, Super Sidekicks, Pac-Man, King of Fighters, Tekken, Marvel vs. Capcom, and several others. In my final days, a 3D football game became exceptionally popular, located in a shop we used to call Daddy's Place. Daddy was an old Muslim man who was cool and friendly. Whenever someone caused trouble in his shop, he would chase them out with his whip, Shambak. Nah, while I doubt he ever used it to strike someone, his intimidation tactics were effective in deterring street kids who would intimidate and harass us. Not all of the street kids were bad, and in 7th grade, I even befriended one of them, leading to a pleasant relationship. The only issue I had with some of these kids was their glue-sniffing habit, which I used to judge silently. However, in my adult years, I've come to understand their difficult backgrounds and high adverse childhood experiences, AC, scores, likely stemming from physical and emotional mistreatment and neglect by their parents. Some of these kids were my age, and it was difficult for me to understand their situation at the time because I grew up in better circumstances. I'm grateful that I was taught well and never indulged in substance abuse. I now realize that certain things in life aren't always a matter of choice. Our environment plays a significant role. Only a few exceptional cases can overcome these odds. Returning to my narrative, I once found myself stranded in town one afternoon, having overspent my money on arcade games and falling short by 1 rand for transportation home. I struggled to ask people for help, but my grandmother had made arrangements with a lady in town to assist me with transport money whenever I ran out. I was too shy to approach her, so in the past, my strategy for earning extra cash was to find a glass soda bottle and cash it in. A small bottle was worth around 1 rand, and a larger one fetched about $2. On that particular afternoon, I searched for a bottle, but many shop owners didn't allow their glass bottles to be taken without extra payment. After checking numerous shops and takeaways, and even scanning the streets for abandoned bottles, I began losing hope as darkness fell. In desperation, I entered an arcade shop owned by an old Indian lady and spotted several used bottles on one of her tables. I tried to sneak one to pawn for the 1 rand I needed. My heart was racing with anxiety, and I couldn't believe I was resorting to such a shameful act. Looking back, I'm surprised at how shy I was as a child, and how much fear of rejection filled me with dread and panic. I was terrified of being turned down, as I was a sensitive kid. As I attempted to steal a bottle and make my exit, I got caught by the lady. She scolded me and gave me a few smacks, which, while not too severe, filled me with shame and guilt. I felt so guilty every time I saw her, and couldn't bring myself to set foot in her restaurant again, though I did buy sausages from her many months later, trying to be as polite as possible. To my surprise, she didn't seem upset with me, and appeared neutral and friendly, almost as if she had forgiven and forgotten my transgression. However, I continued to feel uneasy and ashamed whenever I saw her, and my shyness prevented me from properly apologizing. I might as well continue to reflect on my final 2 years of primary school. Just to avoid writing several articles on the topic of shyness, I remember the first time my attraction to a girl was strongest. I was attracted to girls before, for as long as I could remember, but usually the attraction was short-lived. But I remember this one girl who transferred to our primary school in the 6th grade. Her name was Kazra. She didn't seem particularly salient when I first saw her. However, At one point during the break, our gazes met near the tuck shop area. She was the most beautiful girl I had ever met. Up until that point, I also caught a glance at her eyes. Her eyes were green. Of course, I know now that she was wearing contact lenses, but back then I had no idea. I couldn't get her out of my head for the next 2 years. I also somewhat knew that I never had a chance. I remember that one time when we were asked to design and construct an alarm system for a technology project. For the project, I had basically used a standard AA battery, some wires, and a basic light bulb to construct the system. It wasn't sophisticated and took about 15 minutes to construct. She actually came close to me and spoke to me. She wasn't hostile at all. She had a very thick Capetonian colored accent. I didn't expect that, but I was fine with it. I didn't know what to say to her. I was completely stuck and nervous. I froze. I think I was playing football earlier and was worried about my hygiene and stuff. But she wasn't reacting terribly or anything. She seemed genuinely friendly and curious about what I had constructed. My silence probably creeped her out, and she left after a while of awkward silence. Admittedly, I showed her how my construction worked without uttering a word. As time went on, I learned a few details about her. At one point in the arcade, I saw her walking past. I was surprised. I was wondering if she lived in the vicinity around East Street or Bourke Street. A couple of months later, I kind of stealthily followed her when I saw her walking past. Yep, I was being a creepy stalker. She moved to one of the apartment buildings in that area. I doubt that's where she lived. She probably noticed that one of her schoolmates was around and decided to take a decoy. But it was a futile exercise. It wasn't going to lead to anything. I would most likely be rejected. My attraction to her lasted unusually long. I remember talking to one of my friends about her. It turns out my friend liked her too. He would joyfully talk about how I wanted her all to myself, so to speak. Ah, those were the days, I guess. My attraction to her didn't evaporate because she was incredibly feminine. She wasn't rude to anyone at all. Some of the girls that I liked earlier would do and say rude things, and that would significantly diminish the attraction almost instantly. So a girl's looks didn't play a significant role in the long run. How I saw her treat others was what mattered to me. I never got the guts to tell her how I felt, though. I know how she would react later on. When I had a Facebook account in high school, I searched for people I used to know to add to my friend list. I happened to encounter her profile after looking at a mutual friend's profile. I tried to add her, but she declined. Well, I guess I had grown up by then and took the rejection. Well, now, for more scientific questions, I wonder why people have these consuming feelings. Where do they come from? Is there a surgical procedure to get rid of them? My attraction to Castro for so long was clearly not healthy. Backing up was simply the best and wisest thing to do. The moment I realized that I stood no chance, I should have just lived my life. These feelings are natural, I guess. I cannot really help them. I can only employ my rational faculties to prevent them from running away with me. It doesn't matter now. I was a child back then. I'm a grown adult now. I know how to conduct myself responsibly in this respect. I have managed to walk away from unrequited affection in my later years to be a little vainglorious. I think this is commendable behavior. I remember a Dr. Grande video where he spoke about unrequited affection. The comment section was filled with people who had trouble letting go. They seem to be perpetually tortured by desiring someone they cannot have truly pitiful. I also suspect that there are men who are a lot more sensitive than me, would go a little too far if they were rejected. A few newspaper articles dealing with gender-based violence, etc., are sufficient to prove my point. Maybe I am being unfair and criticizing myself. I think I handle rejection pretty well. I'm lucky that I can shut things down and easily burn bridges if I want to. It might not be optimal, but it's just a better way of coping with some feelings. On another note, reminiscing about my final 2 days of primary school, I recall that my peers and I spent our time playing football, chess, and checkers. I also remember that some books were being cleared out from the Mountain Rise Primary School library, and we were given a choice of which book to pick. I chose Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, and I found it utterly engaging and enjoyable. I should mention a final note about video games. In the 7th grade, I played a lot of Tekken. At that time, I was unaware of the idea that violent video games were discouraged by my religion, only learning about this later in the 10th grade. Regardless, I often played with the character Yoshimitsu and had mastered numerous moves and combos for him. I became quite skilled, with most of my peers sticking to the same moves and displaying less complex gameplay. I used Yoshimitsu so frequently that my friends started calling me Yoshi. When playing against my peers, I was practically unbeatable, but the real challenge came when I faced high school students from ML Sultan Secondary who were skilled Tekken players, particularly with the character Paul. Beating them was tough, but eventually I reached a point where I could hold my own, achieving about a 50-50 win-to-loss ratio. I later discovered that their superior skills were due to owning the game at home and having ample practice. I, on the other hand, only had about 4 rands of spending money per day, which equated to playing Tekken about 8 times, since each credit was worth 50 cents. To conclude, East Street in downtown has changed considerably over the years, with new buildings and businesses. Some areas look unrecognizable to me now. Daddy's shop has long been closed, and I strongly suspect that Daddy may have passed away due to old age. It's remarkable how many memories I still retain. The brain's memory capacity seems almost limitless, and I haven't come across any article that places a cap on how much the brain can store and remember.